I want to talk about just the business high level. You have said in multiple interviews that you didn't have all the answers starting out, which I think maybe people might resonate with who are looking to start a business because they look at you and they're like, she has so many SKUs. She is in every grocery store, but it wasn't always like that. And you've said asking questions has always been your biggest tool. So I'm just curious, taking us back to those very early days when you were making it out of your kitchen, what gave you the confidence to move forward, even when you didn't have all the answers at the time?
It's interesting. I think, first of all, that there's so many entrepreneurs who don't have answers. Like, there's very few people who really start out knowing what the game plan is going to be, knowing the industry. It's more often than not, I think when I talk to people as well, it's you don't have those answers. And so for me, I think a really big piece of it was twofold. One, that I had this strong, purposeful conviction of what I was trying to set up to achieve. I was a holistic nutrition counselor, and my mission at the time was helping people on their health journeys. And this was just a way to bring that to a much bigger degree than the 10 clients that I had. And so I really had that purpose, which I think propelled me to move forward and to ask the questions and to not let anything stand in my way. And then I think secondly, I just had this confidence that I really attribute to both my support system and my family, but also my time at Integrative Nutrition, where in the school, so much of what we were talking about was really going after your dreams. And it was that sort of confidence that led me to say, like, feel the fear and do it anyway. And if I don't know how to do this, I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other and ask the next thing and the next thing and start to figure it out.
I love that. It's kind of like you were given permission that it's okay. You actually don't need to have all the answers. And it's so true. I know you have a podcast too. You interview people. You're right. Most people don't have all the answers. Actually, if you have all the answers, maybe that's not a good thing if you're starting
100%.
Right? Like you have to be in that uncomfortable unknown. And we'll get into your story a little bit more later, but it's like, even if you have the answers, once you level up for the next stage or you hire that next person, it's like you're back to square one and you have to figure out how to expand and take it to the next step. So I love that. And, one thing you mentioned was that support system. And I'm super curious about your family. So what was, your childhood like? What was encouraged? What was celebrated? Because I'm so curious how all of that has shaped the woman you are today.
Yeah. So I actually just had my mom on the podcast.
Really?
Really fun because I don't always ask her those questions. And so our team put together some of the questions, and, it was what did she think of all of this and what my childhood was like? And so it was fun to hear her describe it. But I think I was always a very ambitious in the way of, I just wanted to get things right and like tried really hard. So in sports, for example, I would, hit the tennis ball on the garage door hour after hour, just trying to get better and better at what I was doing. And so I always had that sort of mentality. I think I was very fortunate to grow up in an atmosphere where my parents were very supportive of whatever it was that both my sister and I were desiring to do. I think probably sports were sort of the biggest one that I can think of. And my surrounding family outside of my immediate family was also very supportive. I had two girl cousins who lived across the street. I was the youngest of the four. And so it was sort of the baby cousin that everybody loved and gave a lot of support to. So I do think that confidence early on in my life certainly helped propel me to think that I could go and do hard things that weren't necessarily something that I was in my comfort zone.
I love that. And you mentioned you were a child that wanted to get things right. And I'm just curious, did that ever transfer to perfectionism, whether it was when you were in undergrad or high school or when you started as a founder? Did that ever come up for you?
I don't know that I would say that I was a perfectionist, but I certainly teeter on that side of wanting to be in control and wanting everything like set in the ways and done in the way that I want it. So I'm definitely on the spectrum.
It's so funny when I start like organizing the house and just being more tidy. My husband's like, so what's going on in the business? Because it just is like my sense of business, you're always feeling out of control. And I'm like, my tendency is like, I try to control things, but it's been the perfect lesson of starting the business of you need to surrender sometimes and do the best you can. But it's just my control comes out in different ways. He's like, when you start nitpicking the house, I know something's going on. I'm like, you're right. Else. Yeah, something else. So I totally resonate with that. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit to your college days. I actually did not know you went to Boston University. I'm a BU grad.
Oh, no way.
I was like, this is amazing. And I was chuckling because you, in another interview, you were saying, you were partying, but you were still doing yoga Sunday mornings. I'm like, girl, it did not look like that for me. Like I was going out, but I was not into wellness, which is so funny because that's like my way of life now. So I am just curious, like, were you always interested in the wellness piece, or how did you get that exposure? Because you don't really hear college students like enjoying college, going out and still like doing yoga and doing all that stuff, especially in Boston.
Yeah. And I think especially like in this day and age more, I think there's, this generation is certainly way more into wellness. But in 1999, when I graduated high school and then went to Boston University, certainly doing yoga was not anything that anyone was doing. So growing up, I was athletic and I hated to run. I always joke that later on I did marathons and triathlons, but I would hide in the woods during lacrosse practice when we had to go do our mile like loop around school because I just hated to run so much. So I did not like that, but I was always a relatively healthy eater, I would say. Not necessarily purposefully. That's just what I was drawn to. And then when I went to college, my mom had actually been someone who was, I would say, ahead of her time in wellness. So she had gone to Canyon Ranch way back in the day. And so there was some exposure there that I think I must have seen. And so fast forward, I go to Boston University. I am definitely out partying a lot and then waking up and actually driving over to Cambridge and going to Baptiste Power Yoga, which is like his heyday. I don't know if you've ever done that type of yoga, but his initial studio was there. And it was this incredible experience that I really did feel very torn of. Like I had this one side of myself and then this other side that was becoming very spiritual and finding like a lot of peace in going to yoga and having a practice and having that like time on my mat to just quiet everything down. I think the other big thing in college is that I really started to see exposure to so many friends and those surrounding who had eating disorders and just a negative relationship with food that really also I think came in the forefront for me of how I thought about health and what I was feeding myself and appreciating that I had a healthy relationship with food.
Mm-hmm. So that was kind of planting the seed for the future of what to come. And, you ended up moving to New York City after college and, you landed a job in fashion, doing sales and marketing for a handbag company. And I'm curious from the outside, I know, because I moved to New York, like that's the place to be. Like everyone is going to New York. So like you quote unquote made it as this 20-year-old landing in the city. But what was really going on in the time when you were getting that job? Did you feel fulfilled? Did you feel like something was missing? What was going on in Elizabeth's mind?
I was really searching. So after graduating college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was in the School of Management at BU and had a major in marketing. So I knew I wanted something in that space. And I did always feel very entrepreneurial growing up. I laughed that I had like written this letter to Michael Eisner, who was CEO of Disney when I was 13, about a business concept idea, and like just always had a business mind as a kid that looked at experiences differently. But after college, I certainly knew I wanted to move to New York. I did not know what I wanted to do. I did not have a job right away. My best friend, roommate, she had a job the day we graduated. And I just remember being like so stressed out that I did not. And it took some time to figure it out. Ultimately, I actually ended up taking classes at FIT. and took handbag design classes, was out one night wearing the handbag that I had made. And a woman came up to me and said, I love your handbag. And we started talking, and she said, my company is looking to hire someone. And so that was ultimately how I got that job. And what I found there was really that I wasn't happy. It wasn't really a wonderful cultural environment, and it just felt like something was missing. And at the same time, I was starting to do marathons and triathlons and really find this renewed sense of health and wellness. And so ultimately wanted to really find a career that was more aligned with that, and ended up enrolling in the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And that was really how it all evolved from there.
And I'm curious, I did not know that you went to FIT for a little bit and you created this handbag and someone stopped you. At that time, did you think you wanted to be in fashion? Like, was that the goal, or you were just kind of still exploring?
I think I was exploring. Like, looking back, I don't really remember feeling like this is my calling, but I was always creative, and I did get into it. I bought a sewing machine. I started a company, so I did start to sell my belts to a local store, and so that was probably my first idea of running my own business.
And I always love to ask, even if it's a small business, I think you create a product, even if you sell to one person, there's still a lesson. There's still something you learn. So looking back at that, were there any lessons or anything you learned about business where you like, oh, I love this. Something is here. I know I'm an entrepreneur, or just any lessons from that time?
I think that was the lesson. I think I'm not a great handbag designer, but I loved creating. I loved this idea of taking something from scratch and having a physical thing to show and to share and to bring to life and to like birth this idea.
I love it. It's so cool because clearly it's translated in different ways now with products, and you're still creative and creating. So it's so cool how, you eventually landed there. Did you quit that job and ended up going to nutrition school? You're like, I'm done with that. Or was it a side thing?
It was a side thing. So I did the program at the time. Today, the program is remote, but at the time it was in New York City, live and in person, which was amazing and wonderful. But I did them both together. And then ultimately, once I finished the program and I started to see clients and was teaching cooking classes and everything at that point, then I ended up quitting my job.
To do that full time. And I love that you said the school kind of taught you or opened your eyes to going after your dreams, like being fearful, but doing it anyway. So it was definitely planting that seed. And I think that's also good if you're seeing clients and you're essentially like you're self-employed then too. It's like, how do you create your brand and marketing? You weren't selling a product at the time, but all still good skills, like as a practitioner.
For sure.
Right?
I mean, honestly, that gave me the tools to start the business, because at the time there was no social media, there was none of that, but there was newsletters, and it really set up, how do you market yourself? How do you get out there? And so ultimately that's what I started to tell people is sign up for my nutrition newsletter, which turned into a Purely Elizabeth newsletter. But it was those tools that were so helpful.
I love that, because if anyone's listening in, sometimes, at least before I started my own business, I'm like, how is my experience going to translate into one day starting whatever that is? And there's so many skill sets that you have that if I had that reassurance as, in my 20s, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable. Like, okay, this is all going to make sense. Whatever I'm doing today actually will benefit me. So I love hearing how you were seeing clients, which, is different than running a CPG product-based business, but you had so many learnings and it actually provided the foundation for you to eventually start your next business. So tell me, you were initially, wanting to get clients, you started this newsletter, like that was what you were doing. So what kind of shifted where you were like, oh, let me play around with a product? Cause that happened kind of maybe a little randomly, which I love.
Yeah. So, throughout the program, I definitely saw that there was a hole in the market for healthier, better tasting gluten-free products. I was starting to eat gluten-free. And as I was working with clients, many of them were gluten-free, or I would have them go on an elimination diet. They'd feel better taking gluten out of their diet. And ultimately, when it came time to suggest products for them to buy, particularly sweet things, because I have a sweet tooth. And so, I went to Whole Foods and was like, there is nothing here that is healthy and has great ingredients. And the things that are gluten-free have horrible ingredients and they don't taste great. So it was really this trade-off. But I didn't take that idea and say, I'm going to write a business plan. Ultimately, I went to a local triathlon in Westchester, New York, to participate in the race, but also to try to get clients. So I had a booth the day before the race, and completely on a whim, the night before, I decided to bake up a batch of blueberry muffins.
Really? On a whim?
On a whim. I was just going to hand out a recipe for kale salad. That was going to be like my takeaway for people to remember me. And looking back, this is 2007, so almost now 20 years ago, handing out a recipe for kale salad would not have been a winning decision. So instead, for whatever reason, I had never made these muffins before. I just decided I'm going to make a batch of blueberry muffins instead. And hopefully that'll entice people to come and chat with me and, remember my nutrition counseling that I'm trying to sell. So I end up bringing the muffins to the race, and, a couple of people made a comment about it and didn't think anything. And then as the morning progressed and person after person kept saying like, wow, these are incredible tasting, and like, oh, and they have chia seeds and they have millet flour, and people didn't even know what those ingredients were. They weren't known ingredients at the time. Coconut sugar, coconut oil. So it was really this aha moment that I had, and ended up sort of pivoting later on in the day and said, when you sign up for my nutrition newsletter, I'll let you know when the products will be available. I didn't know when the products would be available, but that's what I said.
Yes.
And that was the genesis of the idea.
I love that for so many reasons, because it's funny, you said you pivoted later in the afternoon. It wasn't like you pivoted 2 months later where you're like, oh, that one time. Like, I love the quickness of that pivot. And sometimes the idea you have for yourself isn't always, it might not be the one that it will be the main thing, quote unquote. So I love that you were open to feedback from customers and willing to pivot into something different, and whatever to get your mission across around healthy eating, whether it was meeting with clients or products. I love that you were able to quickly pivot, because I do think sometimes people are kind of stuck in their ways, and that's just, I think, tough in business. So cool that you pivoted throughout the day. You have no idea how you're going to send these products to people. You just made it on a whim the night before. Amazing. I love that. I did not know that. So then tell me the next steps. Those were maybe your first initial clients. How were you making it? And what was the next kind of inflection point for these muffins that you were making?
So that was October of 2008. And I left that race. And to your point, I pivoted because the conviction was just so strong. It was so many people said the same thing, the aha moment. And it's like, I just knew it inside. I felt it. And sometimes you just have that thing calling to you that is the right thing to do. So I left that race. And while I had this strong conviction, I also said to myself, I have no idea how to start a CPG line. What am I thinking? I know nothing. And so quite honestly, I put it on pause for several months. And it was like, I didn't leave that race and get to work on doing it. I really put it on pause and took time to think how would I do this? How would I put this together? And ultimately I signed up to do the race a year later and thought, and it was still for my nutrition practice at that point, which in retrospect, I don't know why I did that, given that I only got 1 or 2 clients to sign up, but still with that intention. So probably about 5 months before that race, I decided, I'm going to put together some mixes to sell and have it be a mix versus having to figure out the shelf life of a finished muffin. And so I went to the Fancy Food Show that summer, which is one of our big trade shows, to know what I wanted, packaging inspiration, and just to get any ideas. And ultimately put together mixes to sell back at that triathlon in October of 2009. So again, I thought this was just going to be a side hustle, no business plan. My cousin was my graphic designer, and she did the packaging, which I, was inspired by, what I saw or I should say what I didn't see at the trade show. So it was a very unique look in our packaging. And the one additional expense that I had, I was going to take a picture with my iPhone in 2009, which you can imagine how horrible the photography is. She was like, maybe you should spend like $200 and get it professionally photographed. So I did do that, and then went to that race, sold out at the race, and several days later was contacted by Daily Candy, which at the time was the website for the coolest products, trends. And they ended up featuring my website that I had put up and figured out how to launch a website. And they featured us in their newsletter, and I had $10,000 of orders in 3 hours.
Oh my God.
That was truly how the business was born. And looking back, it's wild because we started off as a D2C brand when D2C in food, you can even buy food on Amazon at that time. So it was something that I think that was truly unique that people were excited about.
And was that intentional, or was it like, I don't know anyone, so let me just put on my website so people come to in the triathlon, they can like find me somewhere?
Exactly. So back to integrative nutrition, I had my website for health counseling. So I knew how to create a website. And so I just said, okay, I'll create this website now for Purely Elizabeth, and this will be a place. So I never thought about the fact that food wasn't being sold online and how difficult that might be. It was all trial and error.
And I love how, looking back, you really just took like one step in front of the other. Like you had the idea, you mentioned you kind of took a break, you were seeing clients still, but it was pondering in the back of your mind. Like you went to the show, you had your cousin start, and then you're like, all right, I know how to sell from that triathlon, so let me go back again. And you sold out. So I love that it was very like intentional, but you took one step in front of the other. Cause I think sometimes people think business, like you have to have this whole business plan and it has to have beautiful branding. It's like, no, like do your best product at the time, do the best you can and sell it like to a non-family member or friend, like a stranger. And you saw the response. You're like, okay, something is here. How did you get into Daily Candy? Cause that was like a really big newsletter at the time. Was that happenstance or?
Yes, total. So a friend of mine that I went to high school with and also to nutrition school with, she had posted my website when it launched on Facebook, and someone in her network worked at Daily Candy. So I think they saw it. And again, what we were doing was so unique that I think is what really caught their eye and wanted to feature it.
And did you see mixes out there, but you're like, there needs to be a better and healthier way, and that you were really like the first in that space?
Correct. So there were certainly, we launched with 3 muffin mixes and a pancake mix.
Oh, so you launched with 4
items.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, really.
And so certainly muffin and pancake mixes existed, but using these ancient grains and seeds and coconut sugar, that didn't exist, right? So no one was using, people didn't know what chia seeds and almond flour, this really alternative, nutrient rich, intentional ingredients.
So the 2 questions I have like early on is, people were not talking about that. The landscape now is like people talk about chia seeds. It's like it's a lot more straightforward, but not back then. So did you find the education difficult of like telling people why your product is better? And then also secondly, I can't imagine the ingredients being cheap. Like I know how expensive it is nowadays to even source those. So how did you deal with like the education component and the pricing, like in those, when you first had 4 mixes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, no one has ever asked the education piece to me, because looking back, I wonder how many of those people who originally bought the product online even had ever heard of those ingredients, or they were just buying it because it was something, in fact, that they hadn't heard of. And it was this novel idea. So it is funny going back to the first trade show that I actually ended up participating in, which was a year later in October 2010. I remember really educating the natural food buyers. So you have these buyers coming from all the co-ops, and you would think that they would be the most educated of all. And I remember describing, like, here's what a chia seed is, here's what coconut sugar is. So that has definitely been a piece of the business and the brand that's been so important from the beginning. It was really like, how do I take my background and use this platform as a place to educate and help people understand the differences and why something is better than another.
I mean, you were so early, so that I'm sure was really important. So you're in Daily Candy. You made $10,000, in orders in 3 hours. How were you manufacturing those? And then I have a few more questions from that. So how did you even? Because on paper, it's like, this is amazing. But then on the back end, you're like, how?
I was crying.
Yeah,
I was like, I have no idea how to do this.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, like day one, I was manufacturing at home, like, because I literally thought I was going to get 20 orders and that was it. So quickly, I had to find a commercial kitchen and found one in Philadelphia, which is where I'm from. So I would drive back and forth for that first year from New York to Philadelphia, working in the commercial kitchen with my mom and packing orders and then shipping them out of my Upper West Side apartment. And from that first Daily Candy hit, their power was so strong that it just sort of snowballed, that all of a sudden I was getting inquiries from Food and Wine magazine, from Oprah magazine. Like, it was incredible, the power that they had. And so that first year was all basically online sales and getting press from these other incredible outlets and making it myself by hand in a commercial
with your
kitchen.
mom. I was going to ask, like, who did you have help? But it was just you two.
Yes. And then we had, friends who weren't working who would help put labels on bags and all of that. But
I love it. So you found a commercial kitchen, and then you mentioned a year later from, I guess, at Daily Candy launch and everything, you went to a trade show. So was that the next inflection point for you? Or what was the next thing of like, okay, you have this buzz, you're selling on your website. It's funny because people know you in retail stores, but that's not how you launch. So tell me, you went to that trade show. What was the next kind of inflection point for the business?
That trade show was the next inflection point. It was really, I felt, which today early on, you might not go to, a trade show right away. And for me, I felt like I wanted to spend that money early on to decide, like, okay, we have this interest from online people and buzz, but does that same interest exist within the retail community? And so really thought this trade show is going to make it or break it for us, and ultimately ended up getting wonderful feedback. We won a top 5 best new product at that show. And I just remember sitting at dinner the first night of the show, and my mom and I being like, I think we're on to something. Like, this was an amazing day. We got incredible feedback. People kept coming over and really, I think, loving the brand. The packaging and branding stood out so much versus everything that was in the category, or not even just the category, but the grocery store. It was very clean lines and, sort of taking cues more from beauty and cosmetic than anything that was existing in food. And so it definitely attracted people. And that at that point, we started to find a co-packer, so I didn't have to drive back and forth from New York to Philadelphia, started to hire brokers, and really starting to get into retail.
How are you funding the business at the time? Obviously, like a trade show, I'm sure so early on was like expensive for you, and then you need to find a co-packer. So what did that look like for you in the early days?
I mean, in the early days, it was like just putting things on my credit card and trying to go from one month to another. And then from there, it was, and I was fortunate enough to have my parents really believe in this business and invest some money early on to take this to sort of the next stage, which was later on investors.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, you didn't raise money for 7 years?
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's a lot. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but that's pretty amazing. So
yeah, we were very scrappy and lean.
I love that. And also, like, you were talking about the packaging at the trade show. This was a packaging your cousin did.
Yes.
Right? Like nothing. I love it. Like, it's so real. And I'm like, I love people who start businesses like this because you're like, just putting the money in the product and not spending all this money on like the hoopla of stuff, which might not even make sense. So I love that you guys stood out in that sense. So I believe so. You're trying to get into retail. You're figuring out the co-packer. When did you get into Whole Foods? Was that kind of pre-co-packer or after you found one? Because that I believe was like, I'm sure, a big win so early on.
It was before we got into a co-packer.
Okay,
because
wow.
we were in this commercial kitchen in Philadelphia, and we were starting just to go into a couple of independent stores. And my mom went into her local Whole Foods so that we could come in as a local Philadelphia brand because we were being made there. And ultimately, the buyer, Jamie, said, like, sure, I'll take a case. And he brought us into that one store. And then I think quickly thereafter, we started to get into the co-packer. But that was how we initially got in as a local Philadelphia brand. And then over that next year, single-handedly, she called on every Whole Foods in the Mid-Atlantic region, which was about 40 some stores. She had no sales experience, but it was her daughter. So she was selling something that she was super passionate about. And I think from the Whole Food side, again, it was something that was so unique. And so when she would call and tell them what the product was, they were like, sure, we'd love to have that. Send us a case and we'll see how it does. And it ultimately did well. And we got into, from there, we started to get into another region and another region. And ultimately in 2014, they pushed us out nationally into all regions. So say we were in 4 out of the 11. And then it went nationally, which was a pretty monumental, life-changing moment that certainly changed the trajectory of the brand.
Oh my God, didn't they say in the email, like, we're losing money, we need this in every store? I would just cry. I mean, that's a big
I was
deal.
like hysterical crying on the subway.
Oh my God, that's huge. That's huge. And so it seems like, I love that your mom called on that Whole Foods and you guys sent them a box. You didn't have a co-packer yet. So what was that process like? Again, you probably maybe had more experience being in the world of food. I'm sure maybe working at the commercial kitchen, talking to people. So how was that experience finding a co-packer for you? Was it difficult? I know sometimes it's tough for people to bet on you when you're small. I mean, you did have traction, but yeah, would love to hear that experience.
It was really hard. I mean, especially at the time, we were a gluten-free product, and trying to find a manufacturer who was gluten-free almost 20 years ago, the gluten-free market was not nearly what they are today. So that in and of itself was a major, major challenge. And then we also had almond flour, which is an allergen as a nut. And so a lot of the gluten-free manufacturers that existed at the time, they were a total allergen-free facility. So it just became smaller and smaller and smaller of what that universe was. We were thankfully able to find a small manufacturer in Vermont. I think if we had found a big one, they would have laughed at us. We would have maybe never been where we are today. So we were able to find a small manufacturer that could really help scale and do small runs. So we weren't sitting on a lot of inventory and didn't have those investments that for some people early on, you find a manufacturer and you have to do a pretty big run. And that's a pretty scary financial place to be. So we were fortunate that I could go and do 100 bags, whatever it was, to really fit what my quote unquote forecast was at the time.
And you use that Vermont manufacturer, the smaller one, to scale nationally with Whole Foods. Like they were able to support that at the time. And how did you even find, because you're right, it was so early, like you had all these, dietary restrictions and that wasn't so common. So how did you end up even just finding a co-packer? Was it Google at the time?
It was just Google. Yeah.
I love that. People always ask me, I'm like, Google is your best friend.
Totally. And now ChatGPT is your best friend.
I know, how nice. I know, it's so true. And I'm so curious, like when you were just starting to sell these mixes, it was still muffin mix and pancake mix. Like, did you ever envision the company to be at the scale it is today? Like, what was your goal at the time for yourself and the business?
So it's funny because right before launching, I had gone to a retreat with integrative nutrition, and we did an exercise of throwing our intentions into the fire of this sort of unpredictable future. And mine was that I would move out west and that I would have a nationally known food brand. So I now live in Colorado, and we are now the number one granola brand in the nation. So it all came, that fire exercise was really incredible. So I think that there was part of me that had this intention, but I do remember sitting in the hallway of my Upper West Side apartment, which it was my office, the hallway, and just remember thinking like, we're so ahead of the market and we're so premium, right? Like we were $7.99 and the rest of the category was $3.99. So in my head, I sort of thought we're just going to be in the co-op in the raw food section, which the raw food at the time was the trend. And I thought, that's where we would be. And I was okay with that. Like that was still filling, I think, what my mission was, but just didn't think we would ever have that acceptance from mainstream consumers, which is what is so incredibly fulfilling today, to know that there's just been such a massive shift in consumer demand for healthier, better for you products.
This is like a higher level question, but it seems like you guys got great traction like so early on in the business. Like you were so innovative. You guys scaled to Whole Foods. People were buying your product, which is incredible because you were so early. I know now the business is much bigger, but do you see just like people's awareness on nutrition and mindfulness on experience? Is that just taking the business to like a quadruple level because you guys have been in this for so long?
I think the tailwinds that we have been able to see in that shift is just incredible. People didn't care to the extent at all. And the things that we were talking about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago are now just so mainstream and resonating with consumers. So I think it's really been incredible to watch it all unfold from that standpoint.
And has it been easier? Because you guys still have like high integrity ingredients, very healthy ingredients. Has it been easy to find co-packers? You have so many SKUs now where they can adhere to everything you want because you are quite a clean brand. So has that been easier because you're maybe more well known, or is it still difficult? Because I'm in the supplement space and like I have to kill myself to keep it clean. So, I'm just curious with all these SKUs that you're creating, like, is it a fight, or do you think the brand name kind of helps you get cleaner versions? Because I'm always like, why aren't there more cleaner brands? You go to the aisles and there's all these oils. I'm like, they must be easier to make for sure and cheaper, I guess, which we talked about.
Yeah, I think it's different in supplements. I think in food, like you really are in charge of whatever it is that you're making more so. I think than supplement, and not that you're not in charge, but I think it's just like you come with your recipe to the manufacturer. So they're not dictating anything. It's not easier to make a product with canola oil versus coconut oil.
Really?
So that's the choice of the brand, and that's a cost, and that's a decision that we're making. So that I would say that hasn't shifted. I think there's more manufacturers now who are adhering to dietary needs. So everyone can do gluten-free. Everybody can do, that's the biggest one, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting where you saying like someone using canola oil versus coconut oil, it creates the same thing. So it seems like a lot of these brands are just adding those ingredients, maybe because they're uneducated or it's from a cost perspective, right? Because I'm always like, there's so many brands out there that aren't clean, but I guess some people think like, listen, this is still a better version for you, but I'm kind of on the same board as you. Like it could be better in different ways. So, I love that. So you started out, like you said, you were selling in Whole Foods. That was still the 3 muffin SKUs and the pancakes, right? Was that what you were selling? So, I have like 3 of your granolas right now in my pantry. Like I know you as the granola. So how did that shift? Like, how did you go from having these 4 SKUs to pivoting to a granola?
Yeah. So talk about pivoting and being an important thing to listen to your gut and to pivot. But ultimately, I was actually never a granola eater. Had never made granola in my life. And I'd gotten a sample of puffed quinoa, which is quinoa's baby cousin.
Oh,
And
really?
I thought it was like a cool, innovative new ingredient, and I wanted to explore using it in a product. And it, as a puffed ingredient, it didn't make sense, in our mixes. And so I decided that day just to bake up a batch of granola. Again, had never made granola before. And my mom was in town visiting. She was a huge granola connoisseur. She tasted what I had made and she was like, this is better than anything I've ever had. This needs to be your next product. And I think her conviction was so strong. And obviously I thought it was delicious, but I didn't have a comparison. And I was just like, all right, this needs to be the next product. And so thankfully my co-packer at the time also could bake, not just do a dry mix. So the next time we went up there, we tested out, on a larger scale than just making it at home, and quickly saw that people were so much more interested in the granola than they were the baking mixes. I was living in New York. I was demoing the product, the baking mixes several days a week. And oftentimes you would hear from people like, I don't bake, I live in New York City. That's not part of my thing. And then when I started to bring the granola into stores and hear customers' reactions, it was just almost night and day. And so it quickly became clear, like, okay, people are going to consume granola multiple days in a week and probably go through a bag once a week versus a baking mix that maybe you're using one Sunday a month. And so I, pivoted at that time and wanted to really focus on the thing that was working and not be spread too thin, because we're a very lean team. There wasn't a lot of room to be working on so many different products.
And I'm curious, like, you guys had those mixes, you were doing well, like you were noticing doing these demos, right? The behavior of customers. What was the time period? Like, was it a year you kind of knew this, or you really knew it from day one, but you never really had the idea of like, what is more of a frequent use product? And like granola just came to your mind. Like, what was the timeline from when you kind of knew this is not something people take every other day because they have to like bake, to then eventually like coming up with, oh, let me try a granola?
I think I had made that granola that one day, and then it was probably a year before discontinuing the mixes to really see, like, let's see what happens in market, because I had to get the product, the granola, into stores and, start to see and test it. And, at the same time of doing demos, I was doing all sorts of consumer events and just getting product in people's mouths to get that reaction. So ultimately, I would say it's probably a year before that decision was made.
I love that. I feel like I've, with this podcast, I don't know, I've probably interviewed like 300, 400 entrepreneurs. And I remember when I first heard someone say like, your first product might not always be the hero product. It might be another one. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my God, because you only think like, oh, this product is doing so well, but who's to say you can't launch with something else? And that just takes you to another level. So it's always nice to keep an open mind and being flexible to pivot. So I love that you saw that response for your mom. You guys immediately moved, right? And created the product, put it out there, saw it did well, and then eventually kind of retire the other mixes. So that's so incredible. And I know we're coming up on time, so there's a few other questions I want to ask. So you guys, were self-funded, which is pretty incredible, because getting into retail, from what I've heard, is just expensive, especially if you're nationally in Whole Foods. And you guys were very lean. At what point were you like, okay, we do want an investor, we do want to bring on, someone on board? When did that happen, and how did you approach your first fundraise?
It was about a year after we'd gotten into Whole Foods nationally. And at that point, I really felt like the business was starting to get certainly bigger. We needed to support it in the right way. Like, here was this opportunity that we had to shine in Whole Foods. You get one shot and you can't mess that up, right? Although we have gotten kicked out of a store and gotten back in. So that's for another story. But for the most part, it's one shot. And so really felt like we needed marketing dollars in order to make the product work. It's one thing to get it on the shelf. It's another thing of how to get it off the shelf. And then secondly, I think from sort of the operations side, I wanted to find a partner that had experience in CPG. I didn't want someone just to simply give me money, but I felt like now, what are those areas within operations that would be really helpful to make sure that we're doing all the things right and better understand. And so ultimately, I ended up doing our Series A and getting investment from the General Mills investment group, 301 Inc., which no longer exists, but they were an incredible partner and one that I really felt like were bringing both, obviously, the dollars, but really bringing knowledge of how to scale in the food business.
And did you guys have a relationship before? Like, how did that connection come? Because it was just really you running the business. It's not like you had a background in finance or knew all these investors. So, like, how did that connection come about?
I met a couple of the people who were the key members of 301. I met them casually at a networking event. We went to sushi with a friend, and that's always what they say is like the best way to get money is when you're not looking for money, right? So I thankfully was not in a desperate place looking for money and had connected with them casually. And then when I was looking for money, I actually didn't do a full process and a full round. It was like, I know I had that same conviction that I know that these are the right people that I want to be partnering with. And thankfully, they were looking to make investment at that same time. And it has worked out from there. And now some of those people have left and they became our Series B and my board members. So
incredible. And, now I'm just so curious about your kicked out story for Whole Foods. I'm like, I got to know. But you're right. In terms of people are so excited to get into retail, and that's one step. But the next step is selling it. So I can imagine why you started thinking about investors, because that's where the money comes in marketing. Even if you have a great product, I mean, that's number one, and then marketing dollars. But yeah, what did you do to get kicked out of Whole Foods? And when was that, the early days or?
But we didn't get kicked out of Whole Foods. We got kicked out of Target, actually.
Oh, Target. Okay.
We weren't selling up until their expectations, and the buyer said, I'm kicking you out, but we're going to bring you back in if you can hit a different price point. And so ultimately, we made a smaller size bag, a couple of ounces smaller, because he wanted the set to be all, a certain price point, and brought us back in. And now today we're number one at Target. So never think that things are too late, because there's always ways to work through it.
I love that. And we're working with other retailers. Have you had to kind of pivot the product? Because, you mentioned it's a more premium product, so it clearly didn't do as well in Target, but you guys adjusted it and made smaller bags to hit their price point. Anything else like that with other retailers where it maybe wasn't doing so well and you had to shift something for them and that kind of helped the situation?
We had gone into Walmart as maybe a good example, and we were doing okay. We weren't like setting the world on fire, but felt like, what is the unlock? Walmart's a massive, massive opportunity. Obviously, a huge opportunity to bring healthier food to so many people in the country where not everyone has a Whole Foods, not everyone has access. So it really presented an incredible opportunity. And we didn't necessarily reformulate anything to be able to hit a price point, but with that in mind, we started to think about other granola products. And that was sort of the impetus for our cookie granola line, was thinking about what may work best in this sort of a retailer. So we launched our cookie granola about 2 years ago, which is a blend of our ancient grain granola with my favorite cookie recipe for this like crispy cookie-like bite. And now it's been a huge success. And I think maybe if we had not been thinking about what that unlock would be with Walmart, we may never have gotten there just on our regular innovation, journey.
I love that. I mean, people love sweets. That's like huge. I'm like, I got to get that. That sounds so good. I have your
it's my favorite
granola. It's like the original, and then with the blueberry, and I'm like, I got to get the cookie one. That sounds
good. Honestly, the cookie one is like the only one I can eat now.
Really? Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it. Well, kind of reflecting back, you've been doing this now for what, over 20 years? Like
16.
16. Okay. I was like from the idea, but 16 years. I mean, that's still a very long time. And I'm just curious, like, how have you really grown maybe personally and professionally? Like, there's so many lessons that you've probably had to learn, and you've had to grow into someone different, and you as a leader had to grow into someone different. So we'd love to kind of hear that from your end.
There's certainly been so many lessons. I certainly never knew how to lead a company. I didn't know how to do any of the things. And I would say probably overall, the biggest like growth that I have seen, and again, having my mom on the podcast, was just this confidence. Like while I did have confidence to start the company, I think that there were certainly a lot of areas that I was not confident in. You know, I remember going into my first retailer meetings and saying to my head of sales, who's still my head of sales, like, you do all the talking. Like, I don't want to do it. I mean, even thinking about my mom calling the stores, like I didn't have that confidence to do it. And now I can get into a room and feel completely confident to talk to whomever, to do whatever. And I think of really just owning the feeling of loving to do hard things and being pushed out of my comfort zone.
I love it. It's like so amazing to just hear like what experience can do. Like you said, you were nervous to talk in that first sales meeting, but you've probably done so many now that you've built the confidence. So it's like, I always love it. I always joke, I'm like, my second and third business in the future. What a different experience from like your first one where you're building these skill sets and you're building your confidence. You've never gone into retail. You've never worked with a co-packer. Like sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask because everything is so new where you're just like, you're kind of like bulky, you know, you're like trying to ask the question. So I love that. And I think in another interview, you mentioned you're an intro, like, would you consider yourself an introvert?
Totally. Yeah.
I love that. I had my cousin, like this was a few years ago. She's like, all the women on your podcast, like I love them, but they're all extroverts. Like I'm an introvert. I'm like, no, they are introverts. So I'm just curious for someone listening who's like, I'm not that person that's like on the back of the product and doing podcasts, but how have you kind of, you know, got over maybe some of those like introverted qualities, or maybe how has it served you?
I know what gives me energy and what doesn't. And so as someone who's like introverted, I need to really respect the balance. And I always use that word lightly, but like my downtime. So I'm on the road, I'm at a show, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And like, I know I just need to come home. Don't talk to me for the weekend. I just need to like do all the things that make me feel great, cook, work out, whatever. Don't talk to anybody. Like that's the key. And really respecting that. I think early on, I, was running on empty oftentimes. And so would push myself out of that comfort zone, so to speak. And now really taking and respecting what I like as an introvert need that quiet alone time to do. But also know that I feel great when I push myself out of my comfort zone and go to the networking thing or go and do the thing that I wouldn't have normally felt as comfortable to do.
And you were mentioning like, the business scaled so fast and like you continue to grow. So you've been running on empty for so many years. Was there a point where you're like, okay, this is not sustainable. Like I need to take that weekend and not talk to so many people and cook. Like, was there ever a turning point? Because in running a business, it's like, you can't get away. It's like, it's all on you all the time. And I can't even imagine the pressure of you scaling that quickly too. So was there ever a point where you're like, this is a lot. Like I need to maybe shift my role, shift my day to day, take those pauses, anything there?
I think I never had like this huge moment of a breakdown that things just had to have a major shift. I think it's honestly been slow over time. And to be quite honest, it hasn't been till this last year where I have recently just been traveling so much. It's been 16 years where I'm like, I need to say no to more things and to have a little bit more boundaries of, there's only so much that I can do and what are those most important things. So it has been truly a journey to get to this point.
Yeah. And when you're so passionate about it, it's like tough, right? Like
exactly. I love it. And I get so much joy and excitement out of doing all the things I'm saying yes to that it's also, I'm torn.
Yeah. Totally. Oh my gosh. Well, Elizabeth, I can talk to you for so long. This was so fun. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to see your future products and everything you're doing, but big fan of you. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.